We have put together some of the talks that Edgar Cayce gave during his lifetime. One of these is called This Business, the First 10 Minutes After Death. You might want to look at it. It contains one story with which I would like to open this morning. I heard my father tell this story many occasions. It apparently impressed him very much. He was on a train going to Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and sat with a young man who had been in a drowning accident here at Virginia Beach. He had been attempting to save his brother who had drowned. And he went down with his brother and became conscious in the process, as he told Edgar Cayce, of his mother's presence. His mother was dead, and she was urging him that to turn loose of his brother, that he should come back. And he was trying to hold on to his brother in this process, and finally did, at his mother's urging, release his brother, and he came to the surface. They revived him, though he had no memory of the revival. He was out when they pulled him in, and finally brought him back to consciousness. Apparently this boy was so vivid, so certain about this experience with his mother as he was dying, that it impressed Edgar Cayce very much. And he told that story, and it was a takeoff for him, I think, a reassurance that the hundreds of almost daily experiences that he apparently had during his lifetime, that he was experiencing, other people were experiencing the same thing that he was experiencing now and then. This sense of the in-between, particularly at the point of death, being very thin, and communication being very possible. You've been hearing about all kinds of states of consciousness where communication and realization of another kind of experience becomes very apparent, whether it be the drugs or the many altered states of consciousness, or whether it happens to be the death experience, the beginning, the transition. And so this morning we want to talk about using this subject, the first 10 minutes after death, dead subject, in this area. What's this death like? Edgar Cayce met him one day and talked with him. And we put this together in this booklet, from which I will read once in a while some extracts. Edgar Cayce was giving a reading, preparing to give a reading. He had lost consciousness. And he went out, he said. He frequently saw himself traveling, as you remember, on a shaft of light, a little wiggle tail. I went out and I realized that I had contacted death as a personality, as an individual, or as a being. Realizing this, I remarked to death, "You're not as ordinarily pictured with a black mask or hood, or a skeleton, or like Father Time or the sickle. Instead, you're fair and rosy-cheeked and robust. You have a pair of scissors." In fact, I had to look twice at the feet or limbs, or even at the body, to see it take shape. He replied, "Yes, death is not what many seem to think. It's not a horrible thing, which is often as it is often pictured. Just a change, just a visit. The scissors are indeed the implements most representative of life and death to man. These indeed unite by dividing, and divide by uniting. The cord does not, as usually thought, extend from the center, but is broken from the head, the forehead. That soft portion we see pulsing in an infant. Hence we see old people, unbeknowing to themselves, gain strength from youth by kissing there, and the youth gains wisdom by such kisses. Indeed, the vibrations may be raised to such an extent as to rekindle or reconnect the cord, even as the Master did with the widow of Nain. For he did not take him by the hand, which was bound to the body, as was the custom of the day, but rather stroked him on the head, and the body took life of itself, of life itself. So you see, the silver cord may be broken, but the vibration, and here my experience ended," he said. Now, let's look a little more closely at these Edgar Cayce readings, because that's why I am, as you well know, attempting to put together experiences, personal and an understanding of the material, but to compare and to work with it in parallel with with the material from other sources, many sources, and share this as tools, as insight, as understanding that individuals can use in that particular way. It's been our experience that this is happening. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people. And so we try to do it with as much decency and order as possible. And you've seen a magnificent example of it this weekend, in my opinion. Here's a definition. Death, from the readings, from Edgar Cayce's reading, death in the material plane is passing through the outer door into a consciousness in material activities that partake of what the entity or soul has done with its spiritual truth in its manifestations in other spheres. Now listen, again. Death in the material plane is passing through the outer door into a consciousness in the material activities that partakes of what the entity or soul has done with its spiritual truth in its manifestation in other spheres. And then we go on. A death in the flesh is a birth into the realm of another experience to those who have lived in such a manner as not to be bound by earthly ties. You heard Dr. Ross last night saying almost in passing, and I'm sure this has been a part of her experience of having to turn loose a lot of physical things, position, and money, and jobs, and all kinds of things, turning loose so as not to be bound. Apparently, many of us cling to the physical so tightly that, as we'll see, it carries over a bit. Someone asked Edgar Cayce, is the entity free of the physical body? Free, he said, of the material body, but not free of matter. Only changed in the form as to matter, and is just as acute to the realms of consciousness as in the physical, or more so, or carnal body, or more so. The feelings, the emotions, the ties. Matter has changed, has speeded up, but you haven't lost contact with the earth in the beginning. Now, many people speak of this as the astral, and it depends on which books you've read, as I often say, as to how confused you are about this, because there are many conflicting terms for these dimensions of consciousness. And one really needs to experience rather than just read books about it and try to define it. You have to experience, move, travel a bit. And I think what we had with Edgar Cayce was a traveler who could describe frequently in some detail what he was experiencing and passing through. You might think of this as in a physical sense, of the disappearance of a propeller on an airplane. When it simply speeds up to a certain point, it disappears. Now, you know perfectly well it hasn't gone anywhere, and if you stick your finger in there, you know even better that it hasn't gone anywhere. But to you, it seems that it has disappeared. It's moved. Or, if you wanted to think of it in another way, the old famous water and steam business. When the water boils on your stove, it has changed, but it's still there. It's changed its form. Now, in a sense, when we move and turn loose of, we've turned loose of the flesh, but not matter. We have a finer body, a real physical body. And that's the one we are talking about that experiences in the beginning. Now, its transition is greatly dependent, it would seem, and we'll gather this from several different sources, greatly dependent on the development, so to speak, of the individual. Now, development, the understanding, the work that the individual has done in balancing his life, releasing, turning loose. Death, Edgar Cayce said in another reading, in that moment, as in birth, we have the beginning of an earthly sojourn, so little or long as time may be. So birth into the spiritual plane begins with death in the earth plane, merely the separation of the spiritual and soul forces from the earthly connection. And he goes on in another reading, for life and death are one, and only those who will consider the experience as one may come to understand or indeed comprehend what peace really means. Now, you heard a lot of this last night with Dr. Ross as she talked about the peace that, you don't have to even think about or talk about people who understand dying a bit of it, but how many don't, and what fear and what strange business, this fear of death, this fear of destruction, this tremendous fear that haunts man about his transition, where he's going, what's next. For life and death are one, and only those who will consider the experience as one may come to understand, or indeed comprehend, what peace really means. So this is something worth working for, worth working with your concepts and your ideas and your experiences, if you will, because we need a little peace inside and outside and all around us, as you well know. He goes on, and here's an illustration, a simile again to work with. The very common denominator for us all is sleep. Sleep is a shadow of that intermission in Earth's experience of that state called death. Sleep. A third of our lives we spend asleep, the physical life, in an altered state of consciousness. And here we have with us constantly a simile, a way of understanding this transition called death, this experience. Sleep is like it. Now, let's look for a moment at the experiences of transition. What takes place immediately as we die? We need first to look at some of the readings and then some experiences. What one thinks, and this is a famous quote from the Edgar Cayce readings that many of you have seen many times. You may hear it again now and then. What one thinks continually, they become. What one cherishes in their heart and mind, they make a part of the pulsation of their heart through their own blood cells and build in their own physical that which its spirit and soul must feed upon, and that with which it will be possessed when it passes into the realm for which the other experiences of what it has gained here in the physical plane must be used. Again, in the parallels, the mind is the builder, and you're going to move into exactly the place, the condition at death that you build now, not then, but now. Now there will be transition and moving on. I suspect that tomorrow, or maybe Monday or Tuesday, Rainer will straighten us out entirely on the subject of time. It is the most confusing of all our boundaries of perception, and it's one that begins to break down in the psychic experience, and that is why the psychic is so frightening at times and so confusing. What we thought was a stable past, present, and future ceases to be, and we suddenly realize it does not exist at all, that it's all in our head, and that there is only one time, and we make up the past, present, and future for convenience, for protection. And only when we begin to break those barriers and use time and space, these two barriers that we create in the mind, can we begin to really appreciate what's going on. For it's all one. We're in the middle of life and death now. We don't die, as you know. We are dying every moment, every day. The change is constant, but we are not aware because of our peculiar perception of time, space. Now, we build then the pattern that we're going to move into, and it's a mental pattern, a mental state. He goes on, when the physical body, the body physical, lays aside the material body. Now, he distinguishes between, I think, this real physical body and the flesh body. When the body physical lays aside the material body, or the flesh, that in the physical called soul becomes the body of the entity. And that called the superconscious, the consciousness of the entity, as the subconscious is to the physical body. The subconscious becomes the mind or intellect of the body. In other words, we lose the physical consciousness. What we know as the subconscious or unconscious becomes the active mind at this point. And we have some beautiful illustrations of how this works on these other planes of consciousness. For example, in our fairy stories. We can't pause that too long, or I'll go right off down the road. As the soul and spirit takes its form in the spiritual plane, as the physical body takes its form in the material plane when we are born in it, it is subject to the spiritual plane, to those immutable laws of the spiritual plane. The spiritual entity of the individual is composed then of the spirit, the superconscious, the soul, the subconscious body, as the body is prepared for the entity in the spiritual plane, taking then the position in the universal force or space that the entity has prepared for itself, and goes through its development in that plane until ready again to manifest in the flesh plane. And so that degree of development toward that perfection that would make the entity in its entirely perfect or one with the Creator. Now, I'll give you a couple of illustrations here of how this kind of business worked. We were constantly looking, as we watched Edgar Cayce every day. It was like the microscope that opens up a drop of clear water and suddenly it becomes alive when you look through the eyes of a psychic. Or like looking at a blank place in the sky with a telescope and the whole thing becomes alive with stars. So experiencing every day, living with this man, you never know what was going to happen next, what he was going to say, or what was going to take place right around you in the middle of the house. And so one morning he woke up with this very interesting, he was all excited to tell it and talk about it, and it was a strange story. He had been asleep the night before, he said, and there'd been a tapping on the window, and he became aware of someone out there talking to him, and he recognized who it was. It was a girl that had worked for him in the studio in Selma, Alabama many years before, and he knew that she was dead. But she was a very proper young lady, and so she was asking him to please come down and let her in the front door. She wanted to see him, but she wanted to come in, in the proper manner. And he went down and he opened the door, and she was standing there. He got up and went down and left my mother asleep in the bed, and we were in the house, and opened the door and invited her in, and he could see through her. But she came in. She was solid enough to come in and sit down and talk to him. And she wanted to know what to do. She said, I know I'm dead, and I've been living with my mother and father, and they keep running off and leaving me, and I don't know where to go, and I don't know what to do. And I was around the studio, and I remembered if I could just get to you, you could tell me what to do. And she said, I've had an awful time. She said, I died of that illness, that I had a stomach trouble, and the doctor operated on me, and I died from his operation. And when I got over on when I first got over on the other side, I was still sick. I was still suffering, and I was very concerned. And the doctor died, and he finished the operation on the other side, and said, I'm all right now. Now, years had been going on, and she thought it was like this, like 10 minutes. And she said, I need to know what to do now. And Dad said that he told her about the light, and how to look for it, and how to pray about it, and that he would pray for her and have a group pray for her, and that she should follow this light when she saw it, and she'd know where to go. You hear us babbling here every once in a while about a light that comes in meditation. If I may be slightly profaned, we had damn well find it before we move over to the other side. We may need it. Where to go? A lost feeling on the other side that is timeless can be very disturbing. So we need to be able to move. You remember, I had this strange experience with Gus Elias, and he, because I was in an altered state of consciousness, he was able to touch me apparently and make contact. Unless we change our state of consciousness, it's difficult for communication to take place. On several occasions, after Edgar Cayce finished readings, he would begin to talk again, as if he was sliding back on that light and would stop and talk to someone who was on another level of consciousness. It didn't happen often, but when it did happen, it was a very strange thing, because you could only hear one side of the telephone conversation. You could hear him talking to people that you couldn't see. They weren't there. And they were talking and about things that were going on around them. And you have him one day stopping, and as if he were talking to my mother's brother, my uncle, who was dead. And we began to realize that this uncle, who had passed on years before with tuberculosis down in Texas, the tuberculosis that my mother suffered from, the whole family was involved, and Dad saved her, but the readings were not given on the brother. He died, and he had been on captain of a baseball team. And lo and behold, the first thing he begins to talk about to my father in this altered state, and transmitted in the conversation that we could hear, Dad talking to him, was that he had gone to a house that the grandfather was building when he died, when the grandfather died. And this home place had become the center through which this large family was flowing, a point of contact, a return point. And he was explaining that he had gone back to this house, that the house had been finished, and that he had seen all these people, the family there, and that they had all were going off from this house on different paths. And he knew that they were dead, and he explained he had been able to do some of the things that he had hoped he could do about the baseball team. They were winning games now, didn't win many when he strange, the patterns of the mind being built, the house being built, a symbol that they return to, whole large family, a transition point, a moving point. He went into some explanation of this. One day when Edgar Cayce was giving a reading in Virginia Beach here, at the end of the reading he'd been given the suggestion to wake up, and he made the simple statement, if you want to see your mother alive, that Edgar Cayce should go at once to see his mother. Now, there'd been no report of her being ill, and when we waked up, my mother was crying, and because the statement had been made, she was about to die. And Edgar Cayce bought a ticket and got on a train and went to Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and his mother met him at the front door. Apparently nothing wrong with her. And here he was showing up for her death and didn't even tell her about it. And the next day she went to bed. And he sat with her for 2 days. She wasn't suffering very much, just felt weak. But he sat there and watched her move out of her body, so he described it, and talk with her mother and father, talk with her sister who had passed on, and then re-enter her body and talk with him. And it was only after the conversation with her mother and father, his grandparents, you see, that she told him, Edgar, I'm going to die. I'm so glad you're here to be with me. I have just talked to so-and-so, describing her grandparents, and I'm going with them the next time they come. I'm going to be ready. And then she proceeded to tell him what to do about his sisters, and as a mother would, to take care of this and to take care of that and take care of the other. And she was arranging for the transition. She said, when they come back tomorrow, I'm going with them. And she did, very quietly and very beautifully. And Edgar Cayce said, watch this. There's not everyone that can see this, but we heard last night somebody who is getting very close to this business of seeing, of feeling it, of beginning to know what's taking place here. That's what is motivating and moving this little lady that spoke to us last. She is beginning to see and know not just this plane, but the other plane. Now, the companionship of loved ones, said Edgar Cayce, seeks the companionship in that plane. For as the tree falls, so shall it lie. She is well and happy, talking about the person, the mother, seen with other family members in a dream. This was by somebody else's dream. And then someone asked him what is meant by paradise, as Jesus referred to. He has an interesting statement on this. The in-between, the awareness of being in that state of transition between material and the spiritual phases of consciousness of the soul. It's a transition. This paradise that Jesus was using the word for. The awareness of these is the companionship of entities or souls or separate forces in those stages of development. It is time and space, as I've said, that can be the most confusing for us. Let me look with you then at another area on this transition from the readings. As to how long death may take, many individuals have remained in that called death for what ye called years without realizing he was dead. Now, this is a rather disturbing idea, and in the beginning, you may negate this. You may insist that, God couldn't have let that kind of thing happen. We can't be that lonely. We can't be that closed off. But we only have to turn around and look at ourselves in the present to understand exactly what this is talking about. We build the separation from each other in this life, and we close ourselves off with our mask and our confusing patterns, and we cannot communicate one with another, even those that we reach out to in love. How can we expect to do so in this transition? You say, well, it ought to be better. But mind is the builder, and there is this transition state. We have many examples from the readings on this. The feelings, the desires, he goes on in this reading, for what ye call appetite, are changed or not aware at all. The ability to communicate is that which usually disturbs or worries others. Then as to how long, that depends upon the entity. For as has been given, the psychic forces of an entity are constantly active, whether the soul entity is aware of same or not. Hence, as has been the experience of many, these become an individual, as individuals, individualities or personalities are themselves. He goes on, in the passage, the entity becomes conscious, or the recognition of being in a fourth or higher dimensional plane takes place much in the same manner, the same way as the consciousness is gained in the material. In other words, you're born into that plane, just as we are born into this one. Now, you're conscious when you come in as a child, and you can go back in a regression and know exactly even what you're thinking when you came in as a child. You heard somebody describing this last night. This has been done for a long time. The consciousness of the actual, not physical consciousness, but the consciousness of the other self, the higher self here, comes in. We're always recording right from the moment of birth, perhaps before birth, from the embryo state. We're recording and remembering. We're building. We're experiencing. But we're not aware consciously of it. And so in this transition in death, we move in, we're building. We may not be consciously aware at the moment of it, of that transition. We may not realize that we're dead. But there's no time here. And so this transition takes place in an interesting fashion. In a number of places, he pointed this out. Let me give you another one here. In the separation of the soul and spirit from an earthly abode, each enter the spirit realm. When the entity has fully completed its separation, it goes to that force through which the entity merits in the action upon the earth's plane, and in the various spheres or in the various elements, as has been prepared for its spiritual entity's development. So the sojourn is taken until the entity is ready for again manifesting through the flesh that development attained in the spiritual entity. For the will must be made one with the Father, that we may enter into the realm of the blessed. For as has been given, only the true, the perfect, may see God, and we must be one with Him. He's going on then to describe the mental state that we prepare ourselves, move into that state of consciousness, the way we think, what we are trying to satisfy. If we're too closely tied to the earth, we don't even realize for a little while that we're dead. But no time, and then we begin to awaken. It may be a sleep and an awakening, like a child being brought in and let sleep along. Now the child is recording all the time, every word, every impression, but it is not conscious, doesn't remember, but it can be recalled. We've got a tape recorder going, not only in this plane, but in the other. And so this transition is like a birth here in this sense, and exactly what's been prepared. And people greet and prepare the way for us. And you say, well, what about those that run off and come back here? How can they meet me over there if they are running around over here again and have been incarnated? Remember, this is of the mind, and there is no time, and there is no space there. And so it is that which has been created, and the transition takes place as the mind creates it. And it's real, far more real than what's going on here now. Now, this is very interesting to know that the entity, this is a person, very strange individual. I listened to this man die one night in Selma, Alabama. He had his door locked, and nobody could get to him. And they had the fire company come and batter the door down and put up ladders and get to him. And he died before they could get to him, but he was screaming horribly. Dad was giving a reading on someone in Selma, Alabama, years later, 11 years later, I think. And suddenly he said, this man has just become aware that he's dead. He'd been going on about his business. One is reminded so vividly of Dickens' magnificent handling of some of this business in The Christmas Carol. The strange mental world that he was picturing, and the carrying of the burdens that were carried over from the physical, the tie. There are many, many illustrations of this now coming through. All over the world, the communications indicate and reflect the development of the individuals involved. It is not a set pattern any more than the birth here is a fixed pattern. It's similar, but certainly the woman who gives birth to a child in the middle of a field in India and gets up and goes on with the plowing very shortly after is different from the one that takes place in a modern hospital here in Virginia Beach. Or the one that is birthed by suggestion and hypnosis is quite different from the one that is knocked out and suffering and screaming because they don't know how to handle the birth of a child. So it's different here and it's different there. According to the development of the individuals. It's not fixed and not set and not pat, and you need to be very careful about this because there are tendencies to want to accept and believe what anybody tells you along the way, and it may not just fit you, and you need to come to experience and understand this for yourself because it's a very personal matter, this business of dying. Very personal. For do not consider for a moment that an individual soul entity passing from an earthly plane as a Catholic, a Methodist, or an Episcopalian is something else because he's dead. He's just a dead Catholic or dead Episcopalian or dead Methodist. We maintain that mental set, that pattern, and we carry it over with us, and we face the situation that we've created, and we have the same ideas, the same attitudes. Loved ones prepare for birth in the spiritual plane and prepare for our dying just as we prepare here. Remember, Edgar Cayce heard his grandparents talking and watched his grandparents talking with his mother as she was passing through. Meditation is the way to tune in to greater sensitivity about this, I think. Dreaming is the way to find out where you're going and what it's going to look like. If you don't have any other reason for recording your dreams, record them to find out what kind of thing you're going to jump into when you die. It'll be very helpful. You get maps even to go across the United States. Surely, if you're going to take a little longer journey, a map would not be unused. And the dreams are a map of the pattern you're creating and are going to move into. You can begin to understand what it's like there from your dream. This is why a great emphasis here on the meditation is the way we travel in that realm, on light, with light. And prayer for others who passed on is light. It helps them. It lights the way like focusing a flashlight on. And so we meditate to bring about that state and awareness of how we travel. Edgar Cayce traveled on light. I think we all have seen at times in dreams and in meditation the beginning of this awakening and opening of consciousness where we begin to move with light. Let me close with another final quote from the readings. Yet, if we learn more and more that separations, deaths, are only walking through the rooms of God's house, we become in these separations aware of what is meant by that which has been and is the law from the beginning. Know, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. And ye may be one with one another, one with him, if ye would be as indeed you are, corpuscles in the life flow of the Redeemer. And ye may be one with another, one with him, if you would be as indeed ye are, corpuscles in the life flow of the Redeemer. Thank you.
What part do you need to make the transition easy?
Let me illustrate.
Will you repeat the question?
I will. What can you do in aiding and helping in the transition of a person who is dying? Now, Kubler-Ross's books, I think, would help you a great deal. She was laying out step by step for us last night some of the attitudes, some of the ways of handling situations. And it is, as we said, a most common denominator. We all face death, not just with ourselves, but with others also. And this we cannot avoid, and should not, of course. It's a part of life. We have to deal with it. So what can we do? I would have to say, look at her books, get some of this, because it sounded very good to me last night. The suggestions, the attitudes, the approach of handling persons who are in the dying state. Questions? Yes.
We talked about helping people transcend from the physical body, to a higher state of consciousness. But how is the accomplishment of the higher state back into the physical body? I mean, is it guided the same process by somebody who's done it before and guides you, or how is this accomplished?
You mean the birth?
Right.
Dr. Purrier is going to straighten you out on that this afternoon. Completely. That's his whole thrust of the afternoon talk, is the preparation, and Edgar Cayce has a tremendous amount to say about this. How do you arrange to get him in here? It takes a lot of prayer, a lot of meditation. I have often said that people who don't meditate before they have intercourse are nuts. I mean, they're missing half their life experience of the possible preparation for the coming. But it takes more than that. It's prayer, it's ideals, it's discussion, it's the preparation. Yes, they get assistance, but they're attracted by the ideals and the patterns and the goals and the prayer and the meditation of the people who are getting ready to have a child. Herbie's going to explain all this to you, ABC, so you'll be rushed right out and do it properly this afternoon. Yes. I'm not evading it, I just have to do his talk for it.
Do the readings have anything to say about the relationship of the senility in the transition of dying?
The what? Senility? The question of senility and the transition of dying. Actually, there are numerous readings in the Edgar Cayce files that indicate that where a soul is very, very sick, it's already gotten out of the body and is just standing by waiting for the functions to cease in the flesh body. That it withdraws well ahead of time and is just there. Dad has given readings on people where he said they're dying now. They're in the transition period now. Once he stopped a reading, according to Dr. Ketchum, in the middle of it and said, there's no use going on with this reading, this man just died. And they had moved him too fast, and he'd had another heart attack. It was a heart condition, I think. But frequently, where the brain is deteriorating and where there is illness over a long period of time, the body is going in, the soul is moving in and out all the time, and it has already stepped out, and the flesh is just going on through the physical functioning. Does the soul know that it is going to return? So much depends, I think, and this is only a personal opinion, and you'll have to take it for what it's worth. As I understand it, we are making the choices now for other lives. We don't wait until we are sitting on a cloud somewhere strumming a guitar and suddenly see somebody having intercourse and we're going to be born there. It doesn't work like that. It's more computerized than that. Surely if we can work on computers, why, God's got a better system somehow worked out. We're putting into the computer now all of the factors, all of the wishes, all of the work, all of the talents that are being increased, all of the interest, and we're being drawn into the patterns in the next life that we're creating now, and we're filing those away. Now, at the point we move into the other plane, we go through the development that is necessary there, get ready to return, and it's like pushing the computer. It comes out according to the choices that we have made, you see, and have lined ourselves up, and we are drawn by. Some have more choice than others, but this is the development of the individual. This is the way I understand. Yes?
Pursuant to the word you use, development.
Well, development awareness, if you like. Awareness in the sense of the growth. How much, here's what I mean by development. It is not what we know, but what we apply of what we know, here or anywhere else in the universe. That spells growth. That spells growth of awareness. What you apply of the spiritual law that you know. You're not required to apply what he knows or what she knows, but you are required to apply what you know. Now, as we apply the knowledge that we have of spiritual laws here, in the other plane, in that next plane, and the next plane, then we grow in awareness. It's that application that is the key. That's what I mean by development, in that sense. Yes.
Can you say more about the reading that death is like being asleep, since normally we think of being asleep as being unconscious, although we do dream some.
The question of death being like sleep, I think he's using that as the state of awareness, the transition period. Beyond that transition period, I would think that we know much more, but I think he's speaking there of the transition period, that time that we are asleep and we are dreaming and we begin to wake up and we become more conscious of what's going on around. It's the transition period he's speaking of here. Remember, there is no time in these realms that we move into, so that a moment can be like a year, or a year can be 1,000 years. It stretches either way or condenses. So it's a matter of transition period, I think, that sleep is involved with. And the far back, and we must make this one of the last.
On abortion?
What are my views on abortion? Well, Dad didn't say much about abortion that I remember. There are a few references to it, and obviously certain conditions it's important. But I imagine you're talking about abortion of a different kind here, the choice kind of abortion, not because of physical condition or saving of a body or the whatnot. And this, again, is just a personal opinion. There isn't too much in the readings on abortion. But, you know, if I were trying to get born, and I'd found a couple, I was on the other side, and I had found a couple that had ideals and purposes and were meditating and praying, and I said, that's the kind of, you know, I was being drawn to that. And I got started, and then they had an abortion, it would upset me terribly. I think you can disturb souls no end with abortions. Once their patterns started, you've made ideals and purposes and said, regardless of whether you have or not, remember that the desire patterns, that the mental patterns, the mental set, the surroundings, the ideals, the purposes, whether they have any or whether they don't have any, attract a certain type of soul. And a soul that was just jumping in to start going again would be just as, even more upset than one that was being planned for, because they're getting going. They want to get back into life. They want to start again. They are involved with living in life. Question here.
At the time when you cross over, there is none.
Well, it isn't like it is here. There is no past and present and future. And the whole psychic field is shot through. The average psychic doesn't anymore know whether what they're looking at happened yesterday or is going to happen tomorrow or is happening now. It's very confusing. The time perception, very confusing. And so over there isn't the same kind of time dimension that we have here of a past, present, and future.
Following that up, I wanted to ask, then, does the spirit, could he, in our time, be reincarnated in the past, present, or the future?
Well, what we call past, present, and future, actually they're all going on at once. So
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, let me illustrate it for you. I can't explain it, and I don't understand it, but I can illustrate it very simply by putting my hand down on, this is the earth, and here I am entering the earth. Now, I'm experiencing this in 5 different places, and they're all at once. Yet, if I'm in consciousness down here, I'm very much aware of just that one. I'm not aware of these over here. And they're not in sequence, but they're all going on, you see. Now, if you can grab that and sort of wrestle with it, it'll upset you no end. Thank you very much.